Good morning, everyone. This is Christina Pacheco with the OCAT team, and welcome to the Motivational Interviewing and Rapport Building webinar. So a few logistic things that I just want to go over with everyone. This session will be recorded, and the transcript and the slide deck and all the materials will be posted onto the Learning Center. We encourage folks to ask questions. To ask a question, you can simply post your question in the chat box, and then we will queue up the speaker to answer the question at the end of the webinar. Also, at the end of the webinar, we will have a short evaluation that we would love for you to complete, provide us with any feedback. And so with that, let's get on to today's webinar, which is on motivational interviewing and rapport building. I'm delighted to have my very good colleague and good friend, Chantal Devon, to present and train us on the topic of motivational interviewing. Chantal is the president of StratTrack, a consulting firm specializing in workforce and economic development policy, strategic planning, and organizational development. She has over 20 years of training experience with emphasis on staff development and strengthening organizational capacity. Some of you may recognize her. She was one of our motivational trainings during last year's OCAT Train the Trainer session. And so we're delighted to have her join us. Why we picked the topic of motivational interviewing? A lot of it is from hearing from you all. Users like you all have recognized that the collaborative, strengths-based client and case manager relationship is one of the primary drivers behind enacting positive and sustainable change. I think while most people agree that motivational interviewing and OCAT go hand in hand, mastering motivational interviewing skills and using it consistently can be challenging. Taking opportunities like this to refresh your knowledge on motivational interviewing, learn about advanced motivational interviewing techniques, and taking time to reflect on your individual use of motivational interviewing is part of the process of being able to use it more effectively. This is a two-part webinar. The second session, which will build on the knowledge shared today, will be held next Thursday, October 6th. So make sure you've registered for both webinars. If you're unable to join next week's webinar, the session will be posted on the Learning Center. So for today's part one, Chantal will provide a quick refresher on the main concepts of motivational interviewing and its purpose. She'll focus on helping you understand why and how motivational interviewing is integrated throughout the appraisal process and how to apply MI techniques throughout the process. There will be a number of chances for everyone to provide feedback on their motivational experience so far, so please don't be shy with sharing your knowledge and questions. And with that, I will turn it over to Chantal. Chantal?
Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be with everyone today to talk about this particular topic. I do a lot of training on motivational interviewing and rapport building, and I really enjoyed engaging with all of the staff out in California when we were out doing the Train the Trainer OCAT training then. So hopefully there are some familiar faces and voices on the webinar today, and we're excited about not only doing the refresher, but evolving in our development of motivational interviewing techniques and their ability to really assist all of our clients in their long-term efforts towards sustainability. So with that, we'll be together today for about 90 minutes or so. We're going to have a couple of learning objectives today. As a result of participating in the webinar, hopefully we will be able to work interactively together and review the 4 foundational phases of motivational interviewing. We will work on some of the key components of rapport building in conversational interviews. And we'll also review some of the techniques that help to facilitate rapport building and strength-based holistic approaches for outcome-focused appraisals. Now, it is not lost on me that we are doing a webinar about motivational interviewing and conversational interviewing, and that most of you are on mute, so there's not going to be a lot of verbal conversations going on. That irony is not lost on me, but I am hopeful that everyone will take advantage of typing questions, thoughts into the chat box so that we can make sure that we have a fruitful and robust dialogue about this, about how these techniques are benefiting you, helping you, or any areas that you're struggling with motivational interviewing techniques as you go through the appraisal process. So feel free, jump in and type anything into that chat box as we go along through the process. Motivational interviewing and rapport building with OCAT. Motivational interviewing, as most of you all know, has a clinical foundation. So we don't use it in its 100% full clinical capacity when we're using it with OCAT because we're not clinicians. We take the tenets of motivational interviewing and we infuse and incorporate those into the appraisal process so that we can work with our clients more collaboratively. It's a collaborative, person-centered form of communication with clients, which is designed to encourage intrinsic motivation and help clients accomplish specific outcome-focused goals. I think there are a couple of important words in that particular paragraph. Collaborative is one of them. That means it is between both the client and the case manager. It's something that has to be done together. And it's outcome-focused. There's a purpose for motivational interviewing. It's not simply so that we can be more friendly or be more polite, that it is there to help drive the process towards a specific goal. Motivational interviewing and rapport building with OCAT has a couple of different philosophies behind it. OCAT standardizes interviewing by providing guiding questions to ask all TANF clients. So it is, in its methodology, there to help standardize the process to ensure that we're not missing anything, that we are not required to remember everything that we're supposed to ask a client, but that there is something there to help guide us and help kind of give us a structure to ensure that we're all at least touching base on the same thing. It provides case managers with a degree of freedom and adaptability to get information from a client and to go with the flow of the conversation. It also allows us to mix open-ended questions for gathering more in-depth information with direct response questions to move the interview along and for us to be able to easily analyze the answers. It provides suggested wording for delivering questions and notes for effectively gathering information. All of that is important, but the most important thing to remember about OCAT is that it is there to assist you. In essence, it's your assistant. The case managers really do have the expertise and are the guiding force of the appraisal process. OCAT doesn't replace that, it supplements that and enhances that. So let's start with some questions. I would love to get some feedback from all of you about how you've used motivational interviewing thus far, or how you've used OCAT thus far, and what is the most difficult aspect of the appraisal process for you? Is it number one, engaging the client throughout the appraisal? Number two, asking sensitive and personal questions? Or number three, getting honest answers from clients as you go through the process? If you type your numbered answer into the poll.
Chantal, can you see the results?
I cannot. If someone could share those results, that would be great.
I absolutely can. So the 53% says the hardest aspect is getting honest answers from their clients. 33%,
okay.
Yep. And then 33% says asking sensitive and personal questions. And then 14% says engaging the client throughout the appraisal.
All right. Thank you very much, Christina.
You're welcome.
Okay. So we're at 53% saying getting honest answers from clients. And that's actually not surprising. That makes sense in that we're asking very personal questions. And it's human nature to not necessarily want to share that information, particularly with a stranger. And so we'll talk a little bit about how motivational interviewing techniques help us really engage and focus clients and get them to be comfortable sharing that information with us. And at the end of the day, they become more comfortable sharing that information with us when they understand the purpose of the process. That we're not simply doing a question and answer session. We're not just filling out an insurance form, that there is a purpose and that it is driven by our desire to help them succeed in their long-term goals, which is successful employment and long-term sustainability. So it makes sense that 53% of you would say that that's probably the area that's most difficult. 33% saying asking sensitive and personal questions, that makes sense as well, because as our clients are sometimes uncomfortable sharing that information, sometimes we're uncomfortable requesting that information, and motivational interviewing techniques will help us become a little more comfortable and a little more natural in our conversations as we go through the appraisal process. And engaging the client throughout the appraisal can be difficult, but for the most part, all of you are experts. You've been doing this for a really, really long time, and you've probably been able to master in some ways getting that client engaged in the beginning, because most of you are obviously very personable and very engaging and very astute in what you're doing for a living. So that doesn't surprise me that that's probably the lowest percentage of areas that we struggle with. But we'll talk a little bit about that as well. We can all improve in that particular area, but it's probably the area that we have the most amount of strength. Just give me 1 second. I apologize, I'm having a technical difficulty. My slide doesn't want to move. There we go. Okay, we have one additional question right now. How well do you know MI? And again, we know that there is a great amount of expertise out there in the field already. And so we want to pull from your expertise and find out how these motivational interviewing techniques have been helpful to you throughout the appraisal process, what your comfortability level is with them, and what we should focus on throughout not only this webinar, but the secondary webinar that we'll have next week as well. So how well do you know MI? Is it number 1, very inside and out? You could teach this webinar. I could turn it over to you. Number 2, pretty well. I've had training before and you practice it pretty regularly with your clients. Number 3, somewhat. I'm aware of the concept but struggle putting it into practice with any regularity. Or number 4, nada. This is all new to you. You haven't had any training on it before. You're just becoming familiar with these techniques. Feel free to put the corresponding number of your answer into the poll at this time. Thank you.
Okay, Chantal. So the results are, let's see, 3% for very, 59% for pretty well, 27% for somewhat, and 11% for nada.
Great. Thank you very much, Christina. Okay. And that actually fleshes out to what my assumptions were about this group. One of the things that I was impressed with when we did the Train the Trainer training last year is that a lot of you were very familiar with motivational interviewing techniques and had incorporated some aspect or facet of it into your everyday work already. And what we're really doing is the evolution of that, taking what you already know and helping to enhance it and hopefully helping to polish our skills and master our skills. So that we have such a large group that knows it pretty well, you've had training and you practice it regularly, is really good to hear. And from that, we know we can start to really go deep into some of the facets and tenets of motivational interviewing because everyone really already understands the concepts. You know what it is. You know how to integrate it. But the interesting thing about motivational interviewing is that it's also specific to the person who's delivering it. So as we get more comfortable with the appraisal process and really start to impart our own nuances, our own tonalities, we'll become much more comfortable and much more efficient at delivering those tenets every day in a very natural way with all of our clients. So let's talk about the 4 foundational phases of motivational interviewing really quickly. Since all of you, or 59% of you and 27% of you, are pretty familiar, these you will recognize. For the 11%, I'm going to first of all suggest that those folks in the middle reach out to those individuals who are in the 11 percentile who don't know a whole bunch about motivational interviewing, and share some of your knowledge on the ground. They're probably right there with you in your offices, and the things that you all have been doing and what you have mastered will be very helpful to those individuals who this is relatively new for. So also for those individuals, if you find that I'm skipping over things a little too quickly and you have some additional questions about that, please feel free to put that into the chat box. We want to make sure that everyone is getting their questions answered. So if you feel like I just breezed through something a little too quickly and you have additional questions or you want more detailed information, put that in the chat box and we'll make sure to answer any questions that you have. So the 4 foundational phases of motivational interviewing are engaging. Broadening and focusing are used interchangeably in the motivational interviewing community, but for today's purposes, we're going to go with focusing. The third one is evoking, and the fourth one is moving. And so we'll talk about all 4 of those in detail. We're going to focus on 2 today, and then we're going to focus on an additional 2 in the secondary part of the webinar next week. So why do we even do motivational interviewing? Why is MI important? Why is it part of this appraisal process? Why is it something that we spend time training on? And it really is to ensure that customers take an active role in the appraisal process. The reality is our data has shown us that it is ultimately the client who is going to determine their fate. They are the ones who are going to be the ones that are out there actively trying to reduce their barriers, actively seeking employment, going on job interviews, taking their children to child care, helping their young ones get through school. They're the ones who are actively in charge of driving their life to an outcome-focused, long-term sustainable position. And so because of that, it's important to engage them in the very beginning in the active part of that role. So when we're going through the appraisal process, this is in essence their current life story. We're asking a lot of very detailed, very intrinsic, very personal, sometimes sensitive questions. And so getting them to understand the purpose of that process is really important for the long-term outcome. So that's why it's called really the efficacy of engagement. It is the reason behind what we do. So motivational interviewing techniques help to build rapport with the client, and they ensure that the appraisal is not just a question and answer session, but that it is conversational. MI uses casual inflections and tonalities to gather in-depth information from clients. We know, and we definitely know from the poll questions that we asked earlier about asking sensitive questions, that some of these questions are very detailed, they're very personal. One of the things that helps us get through that and also helps the customer or the client become more comfortable in sharing that information is that it becomes a conversation, not a question and answer session. So an example here is something like, let's talk a little more about your kids. I know you said you've got 2, right? They're both in elementary school. So tell me how school's going for them. Are they having any struggles there? That's a conversation that we can have. That eases the client into sharing very detailed information, not only about themselves, but their children and their family members, which can sometimes be difficult for people. So even with this, I just kind of, walked you through how this example is casual and provides inflections and tonalities, but at the end of the day, it has to be comfortable for you. The inflection that you use would be different than the inflection that I use. You may use different words, you may have different idiosyncrasies, and that is perfectly okay. It has to be natural and it has to be genuine. So you would look at this example, or you would look at the questions in OCAT and you would ask yourself, how would I say that? If I were sitting down and just having a conversation with a good friend or a colleague, how would I word that? And that's going to become your natural way of going about delivering your OCAT appraisal. And it may be in some ways very different than a person who's sitting next to you, and that's okay. So this particular conversation could cover a whole host of questions, including household, learning disabilities, etc. And you may just want to practice that a little bit as you go through the OCAT appraisal or as you've gone through the OCAT appraisal. I know you guys have been using it for some time, but then looking at how you form natural conversations around some of the particularly more sensitive questions. MI is purpose-driven. MI particularly focuses on techniques that deliberately engage the client in fruitful dialogue and provides case-related information that helps drive outcomes. And the very important phrase in this paragraph is helps drive outcomes. That goes back to what is the reason that we do this? What is its purpose? And MI is there to help us ensure that we're getting in-depth information, because that in-depth information is going to help establish outcome-driven process for that client to then get on the path of sustainability. So an example that we can use here is, I know some of these questions can seem a bit intrusive. We've got a couple more, and then we can talk more in detail about your job interests. What that does is it breaks it down to say, I understand that I am asking sensitive questions. That's not lost on me. And so I appreciate your willingness to answer these questions. We're ultimately going to talk more detail about your job interests because that's our purpose for being here. So that small little paragraph does a whole lot in getting the client to understand the reason for the dialogue that you're having. MI is strengths-based. It reframes challenges and deficits. We know that our clients come to us sometimes with a whole host of barriers, challenges, things that are impediments to their success. And we have to be able to not only get them to share that information, but frame it in a way that they understand that those challenges and barriers can be overcome. Because ultimately, again, we want to be outcome focused. So a good example of that is, based on what we've discussed, I know you said maintaining sobriety has been a struggle. I understand. But you really should be proud of yourself for being 30 days sober. That's an accomplishment and a step in the right direction towards getting a new job, gaining new employment, and all of the things that we've talked about you want to do in your long-term goals. So we're just going to keep at it, and I'm going to be here with you throughout the process to help, make sure that we can stay on track. That's, again, a conversation. It's taking something that could obviously be a negative, but saying you're on the right path to overcoming that barrier. MI is also self-efficacious. It promotes belief in an individual's ability to succeed. We have to believe that they can succeed and overcome these barriers. They also have to believe it. So changing the perception of a character flaw to a barrier that can be overcome is really significant in helping the client believe in their own abilities. It amplifies clients' strengths and interests, and it honors the client's experiences and perspectives. All of our clients come to us with experiences and perspectives, some positive, some negative, but they all inform who they are at that moment when they're sitting in front of us. It's important that we garner that and that we reframe it in a way that's positive. Even some of those negative experiences that they bring to the table will help inform the decisions that they make going forward. So I said we're going to focus on two tenets of motivational interviewing, and today we're going to focus particularly on engaging and focusing. Those are our two areas that we're going to talk about today. So engaging is the act of establishing an immediate connection with the client, and it's built on reciprocal communication to help create a working relationship. Now, when we talk about engagement, it's important that we understand that by definition, engagement is reciprocal. Many times we say engagement and people mistake it for politeness or friendliness. You can be polite and you can be friendly. And those are all components of engagement. But unless that client is interacting with you, responding to you, and sharing to you in a holistic way, it's not engagement. So understand that the engagement has to be reciprocal. You have to be getting something back from that client. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're getting full-on positivity from the client. It just means that they are participating in the process. Sometimes we've got to get the negativity out of the way before we can get to the long-term goals or long-term success, and that's okay. As long as they're participating in the process, they're sharing information, you're able to garner and ascertain what their strengths are and what their barriers are, where they are in their long-term process. All of that is part of the engagement process. The second thing that we're going to talk about today is focusing. The MI technique of focusing helps to drive the direction of the conversation towards positive outcomes and ultimately employment for the client. If the customer's conversations or actions tend to deviate from a positive direction, and we know that can happen, this technique is there to help the case manager redirect the conversation back to a purpose-driven dialogue. We don't want to get mired down in any level of negativity. We want to take all of the information and put it in its proper perspective so that we can use it for what our long-term goal is. So when we open the interview or open the appraisal process, I have a question for all of my case managers out there. What are some of the frustrations case managers face regarding client behavior during appraisals? And I know it can run the gamut, so feel free to share any information or any examples of frustrating behavior that you've had to deal with or that you found was a struggle in working with your client. If you would type that into the chat box for me. Okay, so I see we are getting some responses. I'm going to give you guys just a few more seconds, and hopefully we'll be able to read a few of your responses. Okay. I'm hopeful that someone can read some of the responses to me. Nicole, would you be able to do that for me? My apologies for the radio silence, guys. We're just compiling all of the responses that we've gotten into the chat box. So if you give me just a second, we'll be able to share some of the answers that you all gave us.
Hi, Chantel. Can you hear me? This is Nicole.
Yes, I can.
Great. So we had a variety of responses. They ranged from clients being distracted by cell phones or children, not taking the program seriously or not being interested in the program, being worried about referrals to CPS. Those were the general themes that we saw, quite a large amount of responses. But keeping clients on track and focused and engaging them seemed to be the struggles.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Nicole. Perfect. So that means we are right on target with our talking points for the webinar today. We know that keeping clients focused is difficult. That is not lost on us. Trust me, I've been in your shoes, so I do understand that struggle. And hopefully we can talk a little bit about how some of the motivational interviewing techniques will help us, and how instituting some things at the very beginning of the appraisal process to help set the tone will help to minimize that a little bit. The reality is we're probably never going to get rid of it. There are always going to be distractions. But learning those techniques to get a client back on track, to get them back focused, to request, okay, we're going to be doing this for about 45 minutes or so, so you may want to put your phone on vibrate, all the types of things that we need to do to ensure that we can get them through that appraisal process in a focused way where we're getting really good, comprehensive, truthful answers about the information that we need. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we use motivational interviewing in conjunction with the OCAT tool. So part of it is using your expertise. You assess the need and then you use the tool. So it's important to remember that you may not need to implement all of MI's tenets all at the same time. There are 4. When we talk about rapport building, there's a whole host of techniques and things that we use. But it's really your toolkit. You pull out what you need based on the type of client that you're interacting with and any positives, negatives, challenges, or issues that are at the table during that particular appraisal process. So you use what is needed to fully engage the client. Some clients are much more open and happy to discuss their lives in full color. We know that. Sometimes we get clients, they are ready to emote and ready to share. We don't have to do a whole lot of pushing and prodding and pulling to get them to share that information. But those clients still need to be refocused. We may not need to do a whole lot to get them engaged. We may need to do a lot more to keep them focused. So while other clients may need more help in opening up. So you'll be using those tools interchangeably, but you'll also be using them intermittently depending on what type of client you have in front of you. So you want to ease into the appraisal process. Many times we do the initial pleasantries, say our name, thanks for coming in, and then we go right into the demo screen and we start asking questions. So it's important that we ease them into the process, that they get comfortable with it, that they get comfortable with us. We explain the benefits of working through the appraisal process first, or we explain the benefits of working through the appraisal first and then the process. So why are we going through this appraisal? What is its purpose? Then we talk about the process. How long will this appraisal be? What type of questions I'm going to be asking and what type of information I need. And then we talk about the expectations. So we're going to have a discussion about what our expectations are in the long run, what's going to happen after the appraisal process, and what additional assistance or requirements that we have for them. So you think about yourself when you're in a situation or scenario when someone starts with what their expectations are from you before you've had a conversation. It's a natural defense mechanism that kicks in to say, well, wait a minute. And it puts people in a pretty uncomfortable position when they don't understand the why of what you're doing. So it's important that you explain the benefits of working through that process and what they will get out of it in the long run. The demographic section provides an opportunity to build rapport with the client before addressing more sensitive subject matter. But the interesting thing about the demographic section is that it's pretty dry, quite frankly. I mean, it's demographic information. We're asking for name, age, address, those types of things. And so how do you have a section that is pretty much designed to be dry and basic, and how do you use that to build rapport? Well, it's a really good time to just have a little bit of small talk with your client while you're getting that generic general information. The neutrality of the questions provide an opportunity for more casual dialogue. So you want to be careful that it doesn't sound like a question and answer session from an insurance form because you're getting kind of this general information. It's your opportunity to engage the client and really talk about a whole host of topics. You can talk about whatever is interesting to you. So again, remember that it has to be genuine. If you're a sports fan, you can talk that. If you can talk about the weather, you can say you like the coat that they're wearing. If their last name is, like it is here, Costanza, you can say, oh, I got an uncle whose last name is Costanza, if that happens to be true. At the end of the day, you need to have just some genuine dialogue. It doesn't need to take very long. It can take a minute or two while you're getting this information, but it puts the client at ease and it gives you an opportunity to have a really kind of conversational dialogue that doesn't really have anything to do with the appraisal. And it's going to help make not only you, but the client much more comfortable going through the process. you want to go with the flow with the conversation. That's what a conversation is. As you're talking, it will guide you to where you go in the OCAT appraisal. That's one of the beauties of OCAT. It is not stoic nor static. It allows you the flexibility and adaptability to move around as you see fit. Earlier in the presentation, we said that the case manager is the expert and the guide, and that is very true in OCAT. You get to determine where you go throughout that entire appraisal process based on the conversation that you are currently having with that particular client. And so while it may be normal that you do a couple of the initial screens first with every client, it's probably going to change based on how you're engaged with that client and what they start talking about. So you may start out with a demo screen for a good 80% of your clients, and then someone may come in and it may make sense to start somewhere else. Or you start at the demo screen, and then based on what you discuss, you go down to childcare, or you talk about other things, or you go right into some of their employability interests. It really is up to you, and it really is based on the conversations that you're having. So you let the conversation be your guide. If the conversation naturally shifts to a subject matter 2 sections down, you go with that. So where might you start in the appraisal process if when you asked the client how they were doing, they stated, "I'm doing great. I just came from a parent-teacher meeting and both my kids made the honor roll." Type your answers into the chat box and let me know where you could potentially start in the OCAT process if that was a response from a client that just came into your office.
Okay. Chantal, would you like me to read some of the responses?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. So childcare, parenting. This is a great one. Says, acknowledge what a great job that is. Household, child sections, household compositions. Another one, great one, says, sounds like your kids really like school. Another one says, oh, that's great. What grades are your children in?
Absolutely.
Make a note in the household section with the schooling information for the children. So a lot of child care and household composition. That seems to be most common. One says, oh, how exciting. You must be very proud of them. Congratulations. One says, establish a rapport. Ask about the kids some more. Let's see. It says, oh, wow, that's amazing. How do you feel about that? One says, we could probably begin with questions about the kids.
Great.
One says, well, just as it is important for your children to be successful for school, it is important for you to be successful in the program.
Oh, I love that. That's excellent. I love that response. Fantastic. Thank you, Christina. I think I can see some of them now. So thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So those are fantastic responses, and I really love those individuals who did the affirmation first. And that's fantastic. You must be really, really proud of them because that's part of that whole engagement process. That's information that's going to help inform your appraisal because now you know they've got 2 kids in school. Now you know their kids are doing relatively well in school, that they've made the honor roll. And so that in some ways, at least on the baseline, the children are probably doing relatively well in school, and that's a conversation you can ease into. It's very comfortable. So all of you who answered that you could start in the child care section, you're spot on. There's a whole host of areas that you can start in, including household. That's correct as well. Child care and parenting, you can start in that section. And so when we talk about how do you engage, it sounds more complicated than it actually is. I engage by engaging you in a conversation that is comfortable for you. And you've just given me my opening there by talking about your kids and how proud you are. So the first thing you do is what a lot of you said to do, and that's affirm the positivity of that statement. Applaud that parent, affirm how proud they are of their kids, and then start talking about the children in their particular school and any other areas that you can discuss to get more detailed information. So here is a screenshot, and give me just a second, of the child care and parenting section. And as you can see, that would be an easy screen to transition into from OCAT to start talking about children and parenting and any issues that the children may be having, any positive things that are happening in their life, whether they have any disability or health problems. And it would be a very natural transition because some of these questions, again, are quite sensitive. And so since we've already dialogued and engaged in the positive aspects of the conversation, it's going to be a little more comfortable and a little more natural for me to ask some of these questions going forward in the appraisal. So you want to model partnership throughout the interview. That is incredibly important. Getting that client to understand that you are part of the process with them, that they will have a partner in this process, will go a long way in helping to drive their outcomes. So creating a partnership during the initial engagement with the client and throughout the entire appraisal process. It's easy to do. One of the techniques that you can use is to use the word we in all sentence structures where it's appropriate. So instead of saying I need or I will, you simply swap that out and say, next we'll get some information on your work history. So next we'll get some information about where you've worked in the past. We've only got a few more general info questions, then we'll talk about some of your job interests. So normally we would say, I'll get some information or I have some more questions. When you swap out I with we, it psychosomatically encourages that customer to believe that it is a partnership and a process that they want to participate in. If you start doing that pretty regularly, you'll notice that it just becomes part of your normal dialogue and repertoire. It'll become so natural for you that it's not even something that you'll have to work on. So I encourage you to incorporate the word we into your dialogue, not only with your clients, but with your colleagues. It's something that you can practice, and it'll become a natural part of what you do on your day-to-day basis. MI is really focused on a person-centered approach. When we went back to the last poll question and we said, what were some of the frustrations and difficulties of getting our clients engaged throughout the appraisal process? What were some of the difficulties that we had? A lot of it was just clients being distracted, not being focused, not taking the whole interview seriously, answering their cell phone, their children are fidgety. That's part of the MI process, is that we need those individuals to be centered. And for them to be centered and focused, we have to be centered and focused on them. That's where it starts. So we need to encourage our clients to engage in self-discovery throughout the interview. We've got to refocus them back to paying attention and gaining something positive about themselves, even in the most minor way. That goes back to what you all just put into the chat box about affirming what they just said about their children. Take a minute to acknowledge that. Get them on board with the fact that you are invested in their success. Case managers should also use their own expert judgment in determining which questions are most relevant for each client. One of the ways that we get them to pay attention is we don't ask them things that are unnecessary. If they've told us something 5 minutes prior that we know when we're in a different section is not applicable, we don't ask that. We don't ask it simply because it's there. We ask it because it's relevant. So you want to really pay attention as you're going through the questions to ensure that it's relevant to the client that you're talking to. Don't mistake that for saying you can skip questions because it's uncomfortable or you are uncomfortable. If questions are pertinent and they're necessary, ask them. But if they're not, feel free to go past those questions and get to the more detailed information that's going to inform the appraisal and the outcomes that this particular client needs to be focused on. So we've got another poll question for you guys. Which is more challenging to do with clients? Now, we've talked about engaging and focusing, and I know this is something that you all have done because you all have been practicing MI for some time. So is it the engaging part or is it the focusing part? Put your corresponding number to those answers in the poll for me. Thank you. All right, so I am seeing the poll answers here now. It suddenly popped up on my screen, so that's great. I'll give you just a couple more seconds to answer. Got about 70% of the vote in, so it looks like right now focusing is leading the way, that the majority of you say that focusing for the client is much more difficult than the engaging process. Give it another 5 seconds or so. Okay. So we've got a little over 70% of the vote in, and right now it looks like 72% of you are saying focusing and 28% of you are saying engaging. And that makes a lot of sense. That bears out to what we see whenever we're talking about motivational interviewing techniques. Engaging tends to be the thing that, because we're all in this line of work, we all tend to be very social people, and we're all invested in the success of our clients. It's easy for us to make them comfortable and to get them at least initially involved in the process. Keeping them focused on that process can sometimes be a bit more difficult and challenging, and I definitely understand that. So we're going to talk a little bit about focusing. Focusing is really getting them to understand their own self-efficacy. And we know that self-efficacy is really an individual's belief in their own ability to exert control over their life, their goals, their behaviors. Many of our clients, because they come to us sometimes finding themselves in dire circumstances, in a position that they have to request help, often start the process with us with very low levels of self-efficacy. And because of that, it really translates into a defense mechanism where they're not yet ready to share their vulnerabilities and their fears about their belief that they cannot succeed. And so we have to be very mindful of that when we're having conversations with clients, that it's sometimes not that they don't have the desire to succeed. It many times is that they don't have the belief that they can succeed. And so that's where we have to start when we're talking about self-efficacy. And that's where we have to start when we're talking about focusing. What are some of the little techniques that work to get a client back on track, even if it's just getting them back on track in the conversation, even if they keep getting distracted because they have their kids there, even if they keep getting distracted because their phone is ringing or they're getting a text. We have to incorporate techniques that we know to use when those things rear their ugly heads. So in a positive way, making suggestions to them. In a positive way, having little things that we can have in our space that help keep little ones engaged during the time that we're doing the appraisal with them. Requesting that maybe, oh, I know you're probably getting a lot of text right now. We only have about a half an hour or so. So if we could put it on silent, we could get through this pretty quickly, and then I can let you get back to what I know you have to get to today. It seems like you've got a pretty busy day ahead of you. So having those types of conversations with our clients so that it appears we're not in judgment of their inability to focus or paying attention, but we're trying to drive the process without really letting them know it. That really is the art of focusing in a nutshell. And understanding that we're going to have a couple of occasional setbacks. That may not work 100% in the first interview, that we may have to go back and do some more work in the second interview, that we may have to say, okay, we're not going to be able to get to this, and that's okay. Those are the things that when you're in the driver's seat, you can make the decisions about how to get through the appraisal process in the most efficient and effective and positive, conducive way for your client. So clients begin to increase their levels of self-efficacy throughout the process because the appraisal is just the first step of the process, and they believe in their abilities to set and accomplish goals as they go through it. So the appraisal is designed to be outcome focused. All effective case management is outcome focused. The individualized appraisal is really just the first tangible outcome in the service delivery process. That's why it's so comprehensive. That's why it has so much detail in it, because it is understood that it's part of a larger process, and that first tangible product is going to help drive that long-term service delivery process and the outcome for that client. OCAT provides a customer-centered, goal-oriented platform to help assess your customer's strengths and needs. From there, information, as you know, must be translated through the pathway plan into a set of realistic goals with a developed plan of action and service delivery strategy. That's why it's so important that the information that you put in OCAT is thorough, but also accurate, that you're getting truthful information from your client, because it's really going to inform their plan of action and the strategy going forward to get them on the path of long-term sustainability. So the quality of the assessment or the appraisal can impact the effectiveness of the program service delivery, the prospects for successful intervention, and barrier reduction. You know, we just said that. That's why it's important that that information is accurate and truthful and comprehensive. While many questions on the OCAT tool are barrier specific, your feedback to the customer throughout should be strength-based as much as possible. So, for example, when we talked about them saying, oh, I'm excited, or I'm having a great day because I went to that parent-teacher meeting and my kids both made the honor roll. If their response had been, I just came from a parent-teacher meeting, my kids didn't make the honor roll, they're struggling, that's our opportunity to have some questions about what those struggles are, what those issues are, and then set some goals and say, oh, well, you know, they still have an opportunity to get on the honor roll. There are still things that they can do. Have you looked at potentially getting them some tutoring within the school to see if something like that is available? So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what our client is reflecting back to us. What we reflect back to them is always strength-based, positive, and outcome-focused. This is particularly beneficial in the employment section. A lot of our clients come to us feeling that they have no real skills to speak of. They've been unemployed for a long period of time. They haven't worked in the field of their interest, and so they may want to go into an industry that they have no discernible skills in, or they have no experience in. They have not had any significant training in a long period of time, and so they come to us very barrier specific in their belief that they don't have any skills to speak of. They may have desires, but they don't know that they necessarily have skills. However, throughout your conversation, you're learning a lot about them. So you've learned that they volunteer at their church kitchen every weekend. That may not translate in their minds to a skill set, but it can translate to you as a potential skill set and as a potential path that they can go on if that's an area that they're interested in. So that's how OCAT helps to guide you in figuring out this information is translatable to all of the things that we're going to focus on in, one, reducing their barrier, but two, getting them on the path to employment and long-term sustainability. So here's another poll question for you guys. What do you find more challenging with your clients currently? Is it discussing their goals, long-term or short-term, or is it discussing their skills currently, the skills that they bring to the table? If you could put your answers in the poll question with the corresponding number, thank you very much. Okay, it looks like about 66% of you say discussing goals is a little bit more difficult. 34% say discussing skills. And that makes sense to me. Many times it's the same issue that we have when we're looking for clients to expound on their answers. A skill set can be pretty straightforward. I can type, I have worked in a warehouse, I have my CDL license. Goals, a little more subjective, and so you have to do a little more digging. And sometimes we ask for short and long-term goals, and we get very short answers. There's not a whole lot of thought that goes behind what those goals are when we have that discussion in the very beginning. And so I can understand how that can be a little more difficult. It's important that we recognize how the skill set can help build both the short-term and the long-term goals. And when we get into the employability section, it becomes a little easier to ascertain that. So if you look at the employment screenshot in OCAT, you'll see, obviously, you have your boxes there with questions and answers, but you also have that box down there to just ask the global question: what are your short and long-term goals? And if you get very short, kind of succinct answers, it's your opportunity to hopefully push that client to expound a little bit more. And you can go back through the appraisal process to pull out information to help inform that. So if they've told you things 2 or 3 screens earlier, then you can say, well, wait a minute, I know you said you had an interest in doing this, and you weren't able to do it because the kids were still in elementary schools, but you may be able to get some training for that, so that, in about a year, that could be a real, a solid career path for you to get on. So make sure that everything that you're getting out of the OCAT appraisal is informing this particular section, because ultimately this is the goal. You can pull information from all over this appraisal that can help inform what the short and long-term goals are for that particular client. Because many times we don't always know. You can ask me that question, and if I haven't put in a lot of thought into it or haven't spent a whole lot of time focusing on it, if I'm only addressing my immediate needs, that may be a more difficult question for me to ask. And so incorporating some of those techniques to help pull that out of a client is going to be really, really important. So here are some of the characteristics of a comprehensive approach, things that we've talked about thus far. You want to identify the skill gaps and employment needs of the client. You need to address the challenges and barriers, obviously, but do that in a very positive and outcome-focused manner. Collaboration with supportive services is really important, because if our clients are sitting in front of us and they have barriers and challenges, we have to have the ability to connect them with agencies, organizations, and resources that are going to help support that. Connect clients with training opportunities. Encourage credential attainment. That goes back to some of those short and long-term goals that we just talked about. I may not know that there is an educational path for something that I might want to do, or there are training opportunities for something that I want to do. And focus on pursuing career pathways, getting our clients to understand that there are pathways out there and there are stepping stones that they can take to their success. And while they may not be able to do it tomorrow or next week, if they get on that path, they can have a road to long-term sustainability is going to be really important in encouraging them to participate positively throughout the process. So follow the flow of the customer's responses. When we're talking about motivational interviewing, that's going to help with your appraisal process. Encourage the client to elaborate on their answers. We've discussed that at length. Clients that give only yes or no or vague answers throughout the appraisal are not yet fully engaged. So monitor that. Initially, you could have that client that's pretty reticent. They're not yet ready to share. But when you see that, that's when you have to switch your techniques and say, I don't need to focus as much on focusing. I need to do a bit more on the engagement end to get them to open up a bit more. You always want to show empathy. It's something that as a field we tend to be pretty good at. And so that's probably an area that you all have mastered. But you want to show empathy to that client, even when they're presenting some negativity. You want to understand or try to ascertain where that negativity is coming from. Affirm the client's concerns, but always refocus back towards the positive outcomes, because that's the whole purpose for the appraisal process. Develop casual transitions between major topical areas and sections, and again, make sure it's genuine to you. Speak in the manner that is most comfortable for you, that is most engaging for you, and that is most genuine for you. You want to take notes, mental or otherwise, of observations, thoughts, and nuances. You want to pay attention to what's happening with them when they're sitting in front of you. That's going to inform maybe which section you start on, what questions you ask, or how you ask those questions. You may be able to tell if questions are making them more uncomfortable than another section, and there could be reasons behind that. So you really have to pay attention and take mental note or even actual notes of observations and thoughts as they help you navigate through the OCAT appraisal. Always maintain control of the interview. That is incredibly important. Focus the clients as needed throughout the appraisal process. But remember, they're sitting in your space and you have a finite period of time to get through that interview with them. So you really want to incorporate techniques that get them back on track to get them back invested in the conversation so that you can get them through the appraisal process without much difficulty. So we will be together again next Thursday on October 6th. And I thought it'd be a great idea. Why not? Because, you know, you all have tons of free time on your hands, I'm sure, to give you a homework assignment. What I would like for you all to do is to review the OCAT interview video. The link is here. You will be able to access this PowerPoint presentation with this link on the learning site. So watch the OCAT interview video. Some of you saw this last year during the Train the Trainer. Watch the OCAT interview video and write down one example. If you'd like to write down more, that's fine as well. But write down one example of when the case manager did not use MI techniques effectively. And be prepared to share that as part 2 of the MI webinar next week on October 6th. So again, I know that you all are very, very busy. I said that in jest. I know you all are very, very busy, and so I appreciate anyone who's going to take the time to do this. I think it's really important. Next week, as we discuss the other 2 tenets of motivational interviewing, this will give you an opportunity to kind of look at how very innocently you can stray far away from motivational interviewing techniques and how that impacts your client who's in front of you. It may not even be done maliciously. You may not even know that you're doing it. And so it's important to have that video perspective of how a case manager is not imparting MI techniques, not so much what they're not doing, but how it's impacting the client that's in front of them and how it is making that client feel. So if you all could watch that between now and next week, that would be fantastic, and then we'll take a little bit of time to discuss it next Thursday. All right, so we are going to open up the chat box once again for questions and answers. If you have questions that you have been holding on to, feel free to put those in the chat box, and for those who have already put questions in there, we will attempt to answer those at this time.
And that's my cue to be helpful here for Chantel. So this is Christina speaking. So a couple of things that I want to just quickly remind folks. As I had mentioned earlier on in the webinar, all of the materials, including the slide deck and the transcripts, we are recording this session currently, all of that will be posted on the Learning Center. I know we got a lot of questions about where people get copies of that slide. So once it's posted on the Learning Center, you can be able to look there. Chantal, we do have one question in, and that is, give me 1 second. In my office,
I do see that someone gave me a spell check. Thank you so much. Is that Helen? Thank you, Helen. It is inflection, not infliction. Darn you, spell check. Thank you so much, Helen. I appreciate that. I wanted to acknowledge that I appreciate that correction. I'm sorry. Christina, go ahead.
No, you're fine. How do I recover from that? No. So the question is, in my office, I conduct an appraisal in LRS prior to the OCAT appraisal. Therefore, a lot of the OCAT appraisal questions are repeat questions, such as the DV section, goals, mental health, substance abuse. How do I engage with them in this case?
That's a really good question, and I think that speaks back to asking the questions that are necessary. So if I understand the question that you put into the chat box, it's saying that some of the information you already have, and if you already have that information and it's pre-populated, or you can populate that information into OCAT, it's not necessary for you to re-ask questions. If you already have information that can inform some of the answers in OCAT, then that's fine as well. OCAT is meant to be comprehensive, but the reason that it's designed for you to navigate through it is because it understands that information can come from a multitude of different places. So ask the questions that are relevant and necessary. Ask the questions that you don't have answers to already, but feel free to pass by those questions that are either not relevant to the conversation because they're not applicable to that particular client, or you already have that information and you already have those answers. If you want to reconfirm, and sometimes it's necessary, you may have something in that is from another area or another questionnaire or another data point and you say, I just want to validate that this information is still accurate, you may want to do that. But it really is up to you. You are the driving force behind that OCAT appraisal, and you can do it based on what you deem from your expertise is necessary and important.
Chantal, another question is, how do we explain the goal of OCAT? Why are we asking these questions? How do we explain that to our clients?
That is a really good question. And so how you explain the purpose of OCAT, I think, goes back to kind of engaging in the beginning. When you're talking to a client, they think they're coming in, they may be coming in with one idea in mind of why they are coming, what the purpose of that is. Most of them, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but most of them are not coming into it thinking that this is a long-term partnership or process that we're going to be in together and that I'm going to be invested in your success. And here's what we ultimately hope will come from this. That's something new. And so we have to engage our clients in that conversation to say, understand you're here to get, all of your paperwork aligned so that we can, get you in the system and get you some of the benefits that you need and some of the support and resources that you need. But here's what the long-term focus is of this. We're hopeful that this assistance is going to help you in a long-term fashion to get on the pathway to self-sufficiency, employment, and support. And so when you start talking about it in that manner and so this is the reason that we're asking some of these very detailed, comprehensive questions, because we want to do everything that we can do on our end to help support you in that journey. And getting this information up front will help us understand what your employment needs are, what any barriers you have, how we can help you, who we can refer you to get additional assistance if it's necessary, because ultimately we want you to be successful. So how you frame that is really up to you. Again, it has to be genuine, but getting them focused on the process, because quite frankly, some of our clients are coming in not knowing that it's a process and that we're going to be with them throughout a portion of their journey to get to that, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Chantal. A question is, how important is positioning during an interview?
Positioning. Can someone expound on that question? I'm sorry. Physical
positioning. I guess where you're sitting.
Physical positioning. Okay, gotcha. It can be relatively important. Again, if we go back to the poll questions that we asked, keeping clients centered and engaged and paying attention throughout the process is difficult. It becomes more difficult if we are disconnected from the process. So if our back is to them, if the entire time we're looking down at the screen and we're not looking them in the eye, all of those things impact their ability to share with us and their ability to be centered and focused with us. Now that takes practice. It's hard. You have a computer there. You have this very lengthy appraisal that has all of these questions. You have a client in front of you. They've got 2 kids. You're trying to get through the appraisal process. You've only got a finite period of time. So we understand the difficulties of that. Figure out in your space what's most natural and comfortable for you. Position the chairs in a way that you can engage with that client. So even if you have to look down at the computer screen, you have the ability to look at them intermittently very easily. So you do want to look at the physical construct of your space. What's the best way to position yourself? What should be written down so you can put in, and what should go automatically into the appraisal as you type. Some of us are really fast typists and we can get information in very quickly. Some of us are a bit slower, and so we're going to have to develop techniques that work for us. It really is something that is driven by what is most comfortable for you, but understand that, again, you drive that process. So if you tend to have clients that are very disconnected all the time, you do want to look at how are you constructing your space? How am I engaging with them? Can they see me when I'm talking to them? Is there something that I can do to increase the ability to be able to connect with them, not only verbally, but physically in a way that they're more comfortable? Is there a place for them to hang their coat? All of those things will really impact their ability to get comfortable and have a very natural and realistic and fruitful conversation with you.
Great. want to remind folks that you can type in your questions. And then I know folks have asked about the link for the YouTube videos, and we can send that out in a reminder for you to get those videos.
Great. Someone also had a suggestion here about, why we do OCAT and what its purpose is and how do you get the client to really understand that. And they said, I usually tell them it is better to get to know them and their situation and circumstances in order to better help them in achieving employment and self-sufficiency. And so you're absolutely right. Telling them that, the process is there to really help them get on that path. When people understand the why, they are much more invested in the what and the how. The why is really important. It's critical. So as we go through that engagement process, talking about what the purpose of these things are will really do a lot to not only disarm our clients, but get them invested in why they have to answer these questions and why they're important. And sometimes it takes a little longer. Sometimes you're going to have a client that clicks right away, and sometimes you're going to have to do a little more work. You're going to have to invest a little bit more, get them a little more engaged, and you may have to do a little bit more work with focusing on some folks, but that's okay. That's what the techniques are there for. They're part of your resource toolkit for you to pull them out as needed.
Question comes in, any suggestions for keeping kids entertained?
That's always a good question, and it's always really, really difficult. There are a couple of techniques that you can do to keep kids entertained. A lot of it is just acknowledging their presence, letting them know that you see them and that you understand them. And when a parent is distracted, particularly with children that may be misbehaving, give them a minute. It's okay. So do you want to take a second? There's a bathroom right over there. Do you want to take a second? I know they're a little bit restless, and that's fine, but just acknowledging it. Many times what happens is we try to ignore it, and it gets out of hand, or it creates such a distraction that we really can't focus. It's important to acknowledge when children are restless, or when children need a minute, or they need water, or whatever. That is also, in a very natural way, showing empathy to the parent that, okay, I see that, I recognize that, oh, I know, I have kids too. Whatever that scenario is, incorporate that into your natural dialogue and give that parent a minute if you need to give that parent a minute. Hand them a piece of paper and a pencil so that they can draw while you're talking to your client. There are a whole host of things that you can do that can help alleviate that. At the end of the day, we're never going to be able to eliminate it. We want to decrease it as much as we possibly can.
One question is, we have to answer action plan items prior to printing the appraisal, and then we need to print the appraisal to obtain the signature page. I struggle with engagement while I'm typing these action plan answers. Do you have any suggestions?
Absolutely, and that is a struggle that we hear from a lot on the field. And I always say, just be honest with the client. Say, there's a process that I have to go through to print this out, so I need to take just a second to type this up. I didn't want you to think I was ignoring you. Give me a minute or two, I'm going to get this typed up, and we're going to get it printed out so we can go over it. That's really all you can do. Some folks are really good at multitasking, and they can do it with no problem. I am not. I'm not a very fast typist. So when I find myself in that situation, I actually have to just admit it and apologize and say, I'm so sorry, I'm not able to do both of these at the same time, but I have to go through this process before I can print it out. So if you give me just a second, I'll be right back with you. And if that client is talking, say, I want you to know I'm listening, I hear you, I just need to get this out so we can get it printed so we can go over it. So going back again to what's genuine and natural for you. If it's natural for you that you find that difficult, then it's okay. Let the client know that, and all clients are going to be okay with that. They're going to be appreciative that you acknowledged it and that you asked for a moment to be able to get it done, and you generally won't have any problem.
Thanks, Chantal. A follow-up question to the children question is, how do we ask personal questions in front of their kids?
That is a really good question, and sometimes you have to ask. You really do. You have to ask. You have to say, you know, there are a couple questions that I have to ask. Are you comfortable with me asking those in front of the children? Sometimes the children are not going to be paying attention. Sometimes the client is going to be okay with it. Sometimes if you start asking a question and they get uncomfortable, you may want to acknowledge that. You may want to say, is it because you don't want to answer in front of the children? Okay. You could have a coworker come in for a few seconds while you go over that. There are a whole host of things that you can do, but ultimately the client is going to drive that. If you can't ask those questions in front of minor children, you have to respect that, and that may be something that you have to go back to in a second interview, or you go back to that appraisal process and maybe a conversation you can have over the phone. There are a whole host of things that you can do, but you do have to be respectful of that level of concern that a parent may have in front of their children. And if that becomes a problem, again, OCAT will let you skip over questions and let you go back to them later if you need to.
Thanks. Chantel, actually, while we're waiting for more questions and queuing the questions, do you mind scrolling back to the previous slide that had the YouTube link?
Yes. Just one moment. There we go.
Thank you. I know several folks have asked questions about the YouTube link, so you have it right in front of you. Any additional questions that people have? Chantal, someone had a follow-up suggestion about how to engage the client during the printing of the appraisal page. Someone has suggested that they involve the client in the process of creating the action plan.
Yeah, absolutely. The client should always be, in my opinion at least, should always be involved in creating the action plan. I think when we're talking about just a person's ability to multitask, sometimes there are things that you have to do on the computer end. Sometimes there are things you have to type in, and some of us are very good. I have a colleague who types 100 words a minute. She's very good. I do not. So sometimes I have to take a step back and say, I'm sorry, I just need about 30 seconds to get this in, and then I'm going to go get it off the printer, and we're going to go through it. And so, again, just doing what's natural for you, but always including the client in whatever you're doing, even if you're asking them to give you a minute to take care of something, including them in that dialogue and that process is really important.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to do a last call for questions. So thank you all for the really good questions that's been coming in, and thank you also for suggesting, providing your own experience. This is great as well. We definitely want to foster almost peer-to-peer environment as well. So thank you.
Thank you all for joining me on the webinar today. I really appreciate it. And as I said, the irony of talking about engagement is not lost on me on a webinar when it's really difficult to have a verbal conversation, but I appreciate all of the questions in the chat box. I appreciate you all participating in the questions. It really does provide a lot of information for us as to where to focus that training and making sure that we're being respectful of your time and that we're sharing information that is important and pertinent to you and respectful of all the expertise that you already bring to the table. So again, thank you. If you all have any suggestions or additional questions about things that you want to maybe discuss in the webinar next week, please feel free to share that as well.
And then we have one final poll, which is really the evaluation, which hopefully comes up on the screen. There you go. So your feedback is very, very important to us. So please rate your level of agreement with this statement. The webinar increased my knowledge. And also, if you have additional feedback, we would love to hear from you. Let folks vote if you have voted already. Thank you very much. And again, all of this information will be posted on the Learning Center. And we hope to see you next week for part 2 of this webinar. And thank you so much, Chantal.
Thank you, guys. I'll look forward to seeing everyone next week.